Good morning. So, as soon as you guys found out I was speaking, half of you took off up north. But I was excited to find out a couple of you came back this morning like you couldn't miss. So, this morning we're going to talk about stepping stones. And I wanted to, if you just stop for a second and think, how did I get here? What led up to the point that I decided I would be here? And some of you, it's like, well, you're here every week. But what started that? How did that happen? Some of you, maybe this is your first time. And you're like, yeah, why am I here? We're going to look at some stepping stones of different people. We've been going through Joseph in our Sunday morning class, which we just finished up. And we could see the stepping stones in his life and what took place and what got him to be the leader of all Egypt. We're going to take a look at Acts, which was just read, but I'm going to have to read it again because I think we should read his word all the time. But we're going to look at the stepping stones that took two different people and drew them together. And God was working in both places and for the purpose of them to get together. And so it's in Acts, and we're going to start in chapter 9, and it's with Peter to start with. But if you want the whole story and all the details, you want to read chapter 10 through chapter 11, 18. If you want to get the biggest picture, start in Genesis, go all the way to Revelation. But this concept really intrigues me, how God works in people's lives and brings them together for a purpose. And Acts 10:9, I'm going to read some of this. The next day, as they went on their journey and drew near the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. Then he became very hungry and wanted to eat, but while they made ready, he fell into a trance, and he saw heaven opened, and an object like a great sheet, bound at the four corners, descended on him, let down to the earth. In it were all kinds of four-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, and birds of the air. And a voice came to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common or unclean." And a voice spoke to him again a second time, "What God has cleansed, you must not call common." And this was done 3 times, and the object was taken up to heaven again. So to set that stage, the picture, they obviously just getting back into town. Peter's going up to pray. He's going up on the rooftop. And he realizes how hungry he is. And he goes into, it says, a trance. Someone will say he saw a vision. Picture a sheet. Now, I don't know how big it has to be to have a lot of animals on it. So it's not like a bed sheet. It's big, whatever it is. And it lowered down, and all these different kinds of animals on there. And remember, Peter has grown up and lived in the Old Covenant, where there's unclean animals and you don't eat them. That's just how he grew up. And you can tell that he hasn't quite grasped the idea that Jesus came, fulfilled the old covenant, and has brought us a new covenant. So there's this transition time that the church are all brand new, the church is new, and they hard to give up what you grew up with. And sometimes we do that, even when we come to the new covenant is what we've been shown and we're here, but we have things in our lives that it's hard to just give up and change. But Peter struggles with that. So the Lord brought down this vision for him to say, "Hey, kill and eat." And he's like, "I can't. I've never eaten any of the unclean animals." But God is telling him, whatever I say is clean is clean. And all of this is like one stepping stone to really open his eyes that, hey, the new covenant is here. And that old covenant where they couldn't eat certain things, there was a purpose that made Israel set apart from the rest of the world. So there was a purpose for it, but that has ended. And so Peter's been sharing the gospel with the Jews, because you don't hang out with Gentiles under the old covenant. Everything he grew up with, you don't spend time with the Gentiles. And the whole concept of Gentiles is there was Israel and everyone else. So I mean, like if we were to say, hey, it's us and them, right? So any nation out there, Peter grew up that you don't mix with them. You don't spend time with them. So he's been sharing the gospel. He's excited about it, but he's been sharing it to the Jews. And God is trying to show him that we're going to the next step. We're going to go share this gospel with the Gentiles and invite them in. And so he uses this visual to show them, hey, what I say is clean is clean. And, the concept that it happened 3 times. I don't know about you. Is there certain things that you just had to be told 3 times? You just don't get it, and you don't get it. And then finally, the 3rd time, you're like, oh, okay. I mean, sometimes we're just stubborn like that. We got set in our ways, and somebody has to keep telling us. And Peter is the one that always was outspoken when he followed Christ. He's with them all the time. But boy, he was quick to say things. And so I imagine it probably took a little while to sink in and catch on. So in the Old Covenant, you couldn't eat these things. In the New Covenant, you can. In the Old Covenant, you didn't spend time with the Gentiles. In the New Covenant, they're all welcome. We've seen scriptures where he says he wants all people to be saved. So Jesus has established the New Covenant, shared this thing with them 3 times because there's another person he's working with that's a Gentile. And we're going to see how that leads, how we get Peter and Cornelius together. In Acts 10, verse 19, so I skipped down a little bit. I would be here all day. Well, Peter thought about this vision. The Spirit said to him, behold, 3 men are seeking you. Arise, therefore, go down to them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them. These 3 men are going to be Gentiles. They're coming to seek him out. And God has to tell them, hey, it's going to be okay. Just go with them. And so those 3 men are coming from Cornelius. And we haven't read yet why. What's going on with Cornelius? So we get down to verse 25. As Peter was coming in to Cornelius, he met him and fell down at his feet and worshiped him. But Peter lifted him up, saying, stand up. I myself also am a man. And as he talked with them, he went in and found many who had come together. Then he said to them, you know how unlawful it is for the Jewish man to keep company with or go to one of another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. Therefore I came without objection. As soon as I was sent for, I asked then, for what reason have you sent for me? So Cornelius said, and this is where we get the idea. Why did he send for him? Here it is. It's verse 30. So Cornelius said, 4 days ago I was fasting until this hour, and at the 9th hour I prayed in my house, and behold, a man stood before me in bright clothing and said, Cornelius, your prayers have been heard, and your alms are remembered in the sight of God. Send therefore to Joppa and call Simon here, whose surname is Peter. He is lodging in a house of Simon, a tanner, by the sea. When he comes, he will speak to you. So I sent to you immediately, and you have done well to come. Now therefore, we were all present before God to hear all the things commanded to you by God. So here we get this other half of the picture. Cornelius is one of them. He's a Gentile, and he is trying to worship God. And the only thing he knows is, well, we've got to pray to him. We're going to send up alms to him. I think some versions will say there's incense. He's doing what he can to praise and pray to this God. And God sends word to him that, hey, I hear you. I hear you, but you need to go get Peter. And so he sends them to go get Peter, and Peter shows up. That was a big reading. So the concept here is Peter shows up, and he tries to worship him. See, when an angel of the Lord comes and says, hey, you need Peter, in his mind, Peter is so important. I'm going to worship him too. And Peter stands him up. No, I'm just a man. We're not here to worship men. We're going to worship God. He's explains to them that the Jews aren't even supposed to be with the Gentiles. But God said to go. God said not to call you unclean. So this is like a starting point for Peter anyway, that they're no longer unclean. And so he comes to their house. And Cornelius tells him about all his prayers and everything. And the guy says, hey, we got to get Peter. Peter asks him, so what's the point? What did you bring me here for? And he tells him he wants to hear the commandments of God. Now that's huge, because it's one thing to just decide, well, I'm going to worship this God or that God or whatever you're trying to do. But what you want to know is, what does that God say? What does that God command? I want to do it right. And so he's asking Peter for that. It's interesting too, that because sometimes that's all we want to do is be a part of the group. We don't really care what the rules are. We don't really care what God is actually trying to do with that group. We're just there because, well, you're supposed to worship somewhere. Well, you're supposed to do something on Sunday. So we're just showing up. But this man, and we're going to turn out that there's a whole group of them that want to know the commandments of God. And so that's important, because his heart is to know God. And I don't know about you, but I related to that because I didn't grow up in the church. But my heart was to know God, and he revealed himself to me. This is a true story of two people that one is already following Christ and doesn't understand all of the New Testament, New Covenant. And the other one is a Gentile that's never followed, but he wants to. And he wants to worship the same God. These two men are trying to worship the same God. And God puts all the little stepping stones together for them to meet up. And so Peter, he comes in to do just that, to tell them what they need to know. And I'm going to bring in from John 14:6, because here's Cornelius trying to do what he can to worship the true God. And John 14:6 says, Jesus said to them, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Remember, Cornelius is trying to come to the Father, but he doesn't know Jesus. He doesn't know that's the way in. And so he's doing what he can do. And sometimes we might be a part of that, where maybe our family has always been a part of this church or that church, and we just grew up, that's what you do. But we never really knew, what's the access point? How do you get to the Father in heaven? And Jesus reminds us that he's the way. There's no other way in. And God sees the prayers. He sees Cornelius is trying to worship this God, and says, you need the church. You need the gospel. Without the gospel, you don't know who Jesus is. You don't know that's the way in. That's the only way in. That's the truth and the life. And so he sends Peter. So again, if you want to see the whole story, because there's a lot of details I'd leave out for time, but you're going to read chapter 10, chapter 11 through 18. And it's a great story how they work things together and they become to this point where Peter can share the gospel with them. Okay? And God hasn't changed. God didn't force Cornelius to go to the church. He didn't force him. He told him, if you want to know, you need to get with Peter. You need to get with the church. You need the gospel. You need to know who Christ is. And so he didn't force him, but he told him what he could do, what he needs. And sometimes when we're the one that, I'll just say the church member, I remember when Libby brings her Bible to picnics, and I was like, really? So sometimes we're not that open to it up front. But when we're out there and we're bringing the word of God to people, if they want the truth, they'll accept it. And Cornelius wanted the truth, so he accepted it. He called, hey, go get Peter. If that's what has to be done, go get him. And God hasn't changed. Maybe you didn't see the stepping stones that got you here. Maybe there was a lot of stepping stones, but you didn't notice them. We talked about with Joseph, there was stepping stones that weren't fun. They weren't fun for Joseph, but the stepping stones had to be. I'm going to tell you some of my stepping stones. Not all of them, because you'll get bored. But I have some stepping stones I want to share that at the time I didn't know that I had asked for God, and he started putting things in place. And it's amazing when you stop and look at yourself. So I'm just going to tell you, my family, typical. Dad had a good job. Mom was home with there was two of us, two kids. And I always like to tell people we were unchurched. We didn't care if you went. We didn't. We just didn't care. Family was tight. I mean, really tight. We did a lot of things together, the camping trips, the hiking, everything. And, there's a time when God was calling Abram, and he brought him away from his family and all his friends and stuff. He said, I want you to move. Adam didn't even ask where we're going. He said, all right, let's go. So I'm going to point that out, that when God was looking, he knew he had to get me away from my family and friends, or I wasn't going to hear it. Even if I wanted the truth, my friends and my family were going to overwhelm that. So he took me away from there. But before I tell you what happens to me, I think you need to hear again about Jacob and Joseph, because there's some stepping stones there that weren't fun. And they lived in Canaan, which is the promised land eventually. But God is going to wreck it and build it up to be the best promised land ever. And so he needs them to move out. And, we just did that story, so I'm just going to read a little piece of it from Genesis 37:33. When his brothers had sold him, he brought the coat back, and it says in 33, and he recognized it and said, it is my son's tunic, a wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, and he refused to be comforted. God knows Joseph is alive, and he couldn't tell Jacob because the stepping stone wasn't finished. It was just the first step in getting all of what would be Israel to Egypt. And so sometimes it doesn't feel good while you're in that step. When you're in that particular stepping stone, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't, what is God doing? And we don't know. Or if it's prior to really, we don't quite know God, we want to know him, we don't even know that he's putting those stepping stones in place. And so sometimes they're not the funnest point in your life, but the stepping stones are there. And so I'm just going to say, no, I wasn't sold. That's not the part of the story I was going to tell you. But my parents, as close as we were, they ended up divorced. Now, I look back and I think about the 70s was like this big boom, like, oh, you can divorce, and everybody started doing that. I think that was part of it. But somehow that happened. And I can tell you, that was one of those things that really destroyed me. As a young kid, I was 11. And part of those things I lived in Ohio, where if you had to be 12 or above to choose which parent, plus they had to be fit. If you were 11 and below, you were going with mom no matter what. Now, when I turned 12, I realized I want to spend time with my dad. Well, you have to sit in front of a judge or a lawyer and tell them, as a kid, yeah, I don't want to be with you, Mom. I want to be with Dad. And remember, we were close, all of us. So it was pretty struggle. I started failing in every class there was in school. It doesn't seem like anybody cared. I didn't. And, when you're failing everything except for math, I was a genius in math. And that's a stepping stone. I want you to hang on to that. I was good at math, failing everything else. And then when I choose to go live with my dad, it's a different school district. The different school district, I failed 7th grade just like that because I didn't do any of the work. I didn't do anything, and I failed. Now, I'm not dumb. I was like, I'm going back to Mom's house. And then again, the school just kept pushing you forward. Whatever with that school, I guess they probably got paid by how many people went to the next grade. But they just kept pushing me forward. So there's another stepping stone. I failed the 7th grade. And at the time, I didn't see it. I I don't know what was going on there. Then, where am I at on my notes here? So thinking about that, where I'm failing everything except for math. I failed the 7th grade because it's a different school district. And then I moved back with my mom because that school doesn't fail you. That's a stepping stone. That is a stepping stone because when I look back too, my family, living with my mom, was a wreck. She is remarried. My stepfather doesn't work, which today I think, wow, I don't know how you do that, but he didn't work. We were as broke and poor as you could be. He brought 4 of his own children, and then the 2 of us, me and my sister, we lived in a 3-bedroom trailer. And so it's crowded. There's some that favoritism that we saw in Joseph's house because there were his kids and her kids and all that crazy stuff. All this is going on. Why am I telling you all this? The stepping stones. Remember, I was unchurched. Enough things were getting bad enough that I found myself outside in the winter, laying in the snow, looking into the stars. We lived so far out in the woods, there was no street lights. It was dark and you could see those stars. And I was thinking, there has to be something better than this. There is something better than this life that I have. And I didn't know, I'm unchurched. I don't know who I'm talking to. I'm just thinking there has to be. And God looked down and he was like, I have a way. And all these stepping stones. He knew my heart before I knew what I was thinking. And he's putting all these little stepping stones. Let's see where I was at here. So God took me away from my family and I call them my burnout friends because of the things we were doing in high school. So he took me away from them so that I could hear him. So I could listen and hear him. He took me away. I grew up till the 3rd grade. We lived here in Arizona. And then we went to Ohio. And my dad he had a second divorce, and he came to me and he said, this is my senior, I haven't started my senior year of school yet. And he says, hey, I'm moving back to Arizona. We were like this, and he was going to leave. And I don't think he expected, because he didn't have a job there, he didn't have a place to live, he was just going to go and make it happen. And he didn't expect me to say, I'm going with you. But he's my dad. He said, sure, let's go. And he told me, we have nowhere. We ended up staying at my aunt's house. But it's a point that I want to make, that's a stepping stone. And my life was such a wreck at my mom's house, and my dad was moving. I'm going. And I can remember this. As a kid up to 3rd grade living here, the weather was great. If you've never been to Ohio, don't go. The weather was great here. But also, the only thing I remember is family was great. It's not there, but it was here. Even though I'm leaving my mom, my sister, we're going. So I come back out here, and that's a stepping stone because I have to do my senior year of high school. Libby is a junior. When I started school, I wouldn't have went. If I didn't fail the 7th grade, I would have been already graduated. But I failed the 7th grade so I could be in a math class with Libby. Now, going there my senior year, I didn't need math class. I had enough credits already because of the school districts that are so awkward. I didn't need a math class, but I was good at math. I wasn't good at anything else. I took that class. So now Libby and I are in the same classroom. Libby is the one that introduced me to the church, to the body of Christ. And I could have easily not graduated, just don't go to school. What difference does it make? I was failing anyway. But I went, and I was good at math, and I failed the 7th grade so that I could be in school. Well, she was still there. The Lord put these stepping stones in place, and they weren't necessarily fun going through them. But they lined up, and Libby got me to a Bible study, and I've told you my story on that Bible study. It would frustrate me that all the answers were in that silly book. I was intrigued by it, but it was just, come on, really? So Libby introduces me to the church. God works the stepping stones for people. If you want the truth, he will set it up for you to meet the right people, to be at the right place, whatever it takes. And we can see that in the scriptures when you just go read Ruth. Go read Ruth and see those stepping stones. Not that many, well, it's probably been a year. We went through Esther and all the stepping stones that led up to saving Israel through Esther being queen. There's all these stories throughout the scriptures, and I encourage you to go read them. We're going to look at the Ethiopian eunuch. We're going to go look at him because it's in Acts. We're going to back up a little bit. Acts 8, verse 26. Now, Philip is already obeying the gospel, following Christ, and verse 26, Acts 8. Now an angel of the Lord spoke to Philip, saying, Arise, go toward the south, along the road which goes down to Jerusalem to Gaza. This is desert. So he rose and went, and behold, a man of Ethiopia, a eunuch, of great authority under Candace, the queen of the Ethiopians, who had charge of all her treasury, and had come from Jerusalem to worship. He's not of Israel. He's one of those Gentiles. And he's in Jerusalem to worship. Remember, Cornelius wanted to worship, and God sent the church. This Ethiopian was wanting to worship. Now he's on his way home, and the angel says to Philip, hey, go catch up with that chariot. Acts 8:28. So he came to Jerusalem to worship and was returning and sitting in his chariot, and he was reading Isaiah the prophet. Then the Spirit said to Philip, go near and overtake the chariot. So Philip ran to him and heard him reading the gospel, the prophet of Isaiah, and said, do you understand what you are reading? And he said, how can I unless someone guides me? And he asked Philip to come up and sit with him. The place in the scriptures which he read was this: he was led as a sheep to the slaughter, and as a lamb before the shearers is silent, he opened not his mouth. And in humiliation his justice was taken away. And who will declare his generation? For his life is taken from the earth. So the eunuch answered Philip and said, I ask you, of whom does the prophet say this, of himself or somebody else? Then Philip opened his mouth and, beginning at the scripture, preached Jesus to him. Beginning in Isaiah, preached Jesus to him. They were going down the road, and remember the stepping stone right here. He said that it's desert. It's a weird thing that it's just in there that, hey, go catch up with them. It's a desert area. He preached to him and showed him the scriptures of the gospel of Jesus. And when he finally got a grasp of it, the eunuch said, hey, there's water. What keeps me from being baptized? They're in the desert. There's a stepping stones leading him right to what he needs. He sent the church, and there it is. They're in the desert, but there's water. Verse 37, then Philip said, if you believe with all your heart, you may. And he answered and said, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. So he commanded the chariot to stand still, and both Philip and the eunuch went down into the water, and he baptized him. It's amazing to me that somebody who doesn't know God wants to know him. I know that story. And several different stories throughout the Bible, he brings them to know him. God doesn't want anybody to perish. He wants all to be saved. And when you want him, he will make sure that you hear the gospel, that you know the truth. And Philip had to catch up with that chariot. I don't know how fast it was going, but I picture if he was reading, it's probably just trotting along, slow walking. But Philip catches up, preaches from the Old Testament, because they don't have the New Testament yet, but he knows who Jesus is, and he preaches that gospel to him, and there's the water in the middle of this desert. The stepping stones are all laid out for him. Let me wrap up with this. Both cases, the men were seeking God. and God sent the church or sent them to the church. That's what he did with me. He sent me to the church. He is looking out. Those that want to know him, he will get them. There's no worries of that. But the key is sometimes you're working around that person and you could say they need Jesus. You could bring up the gospel. You could teach them of who this is and what the church is about. And you might be that stepping stone and you're just trying to get out. Don't step on me. You're just not being the stepping stone you should be. But sometimes we're the ones searching. And whatever we're going through isn't that great. Look at your life and be reminded that God set the stepping stones and somehow he got you right here. Whether this is your first time or you've been a member of the church forever, but he has laid it out for you to be right here. If you've followed those stepping stones to this room and you need some help, come forward while we stand and sing.